floor plan. So it uses, once that ruler key is made, I can do an estimate for the entire floor plan. Okay. Now the next step I want to do is add a camera. So I do that by adding that by clicking on the camera icon here. Okay, now not a lot of North American models have been added to this toolbox here. So you can look. Let's use one of our most popular models, our N55 camera. Okay, so once I do a search for N55, I'll just double click. Okay, and the N55 will show up here on the floor plan. Now what I can do is I can click and hold. I can click and drag the camera, let's say to this corner here. Okay, and then if I want to rotate it, I just click and hold and move the cursor so I get this view here. Okay, so I can zoom in and zoom out with my mouse with the bar. Okay, now what these bars tell me is our dory distance. So you can see your identification region, your recognized region, observed region, and detect region. So this is helpful. So, for example, if I want to add a person into the view, I click on this human or vehicle button here, click on human, now click here, I'll place my human person here. Now from here, I can see on the bottom there's a front view and side view. Okay, now I can move this person in and out, so this kind of show me an estimate of what my view would look like. All right, I can adjust the height of the person, or so it'll change the person's height if I wanted to adjust that. Now, if you're doing for like outdoor deployment for a parking lot, you would add a vehicle. So here's an example of adding a vehicle. Just for demonstration purposes, I put it outside here. Okay, now here, if I move the vehicle closer to the camera, you can see both front view and side view are moving, adjusting accordingly. Okay, so that's telling me my distance where I can observe the vehicle or the human. So that's your dory distance. Okay, now one cool thing about this new project design tool is you can export these reports. So you click here to click on export, project name, building A, building C, or for whatever. And you can use a Dahua logo or customized logo. Okay, once you export that, you find an example report. It'll look like, so I did a few of these. It'll look like these report here. This is a sample report. Okay, so it'll have the format, what cameras you use, the camera list, okay, and then the camera specs. So for this, you can add multiple cameras of design. So for this example, I just only used one, but I can add multiple cameras. Okay. So just pick another camera here and move that, for different areas of the building where I want to see do an installation. Okay. Now here on the side panel, you can hide the views, different views of the camera. So this is a very helpful tool to help you design and kind of visualize how the project is going to look. So it's very cool that you can move the person in and out, and it will work with it'll adjust accordingly with the floor plan. So the front view, side view will move. Now, for some of the cameras, you can also change the focal length. You select the camera with that option, and you can change that, and it'll change the window size view of the camera to adjustments. Okay. Now the next few tools are pretty simple, so I'll run by those fairly quickly. So let me close my SmartPSS. Okay, config tool, that's another more popularly used configuration device. So once you open the config tool, you can search all your models that have been connected to your system. Easily, you can do device upgrade, you can do configuration on whatever device is connected. So you can see here's IPC. You can just log in and do configurations on those. You can do system settings, reboot it, restore it, change passwords, do batch upgrades, etc. So very helpful, convenient tool to help you, just configure, manage your tools. The next one is the access control config. So very similar to the config tool, but it is just for access control devices. So I just do a refresh search here. Click on my access control device, and I can do very similarly. Do the change timings, do a reboot, restore, modify passwords, and do batch upgrade firmware upgrades. So that's for access control. Now, for another tool we have is the disk calculator. Let me find that. Okay, now for this one, this helps you calculate how much storage you would need. You click on the add streaming button here, add how many channels, what type of compression, resolution, we'll do 2 megapixels, for example, and then it'll tell you an estimate of how much storage is required for 1 day of recording. 2 days of recording is doubled. Now you can also do by recording days. Okay. It tells you your storage capacity and your record plan. Now also tells you, gives you a RAID calculator and a device calculator. So very helpful for help you calculate your storage, how much storage you would need for your specific projects. Okay, now the next one is the convert tool. Okay, so this one is pretty straightforward. So here you would select your video and select the format you want to convert to. So all these formats are supported: FLV, AVI, some of the more popular ones, MP4. So that helps you, convert your video files to the format that you want. Okay. So that's basically that for that tool. Now the next one is disk manager. Pull that up here. Okay, disk manager is really helpful for example, if you're using a mobile NVR and you just want to take that hard drive out and plug it into your computer. This is where you would make that happen. You can, once your your external disk is plugged into your computer, you can access all the network videos that are inside the hard drive. Now, for all these tools, there is a PowerPoint associated with that. It's kind of very simple summary of what each of the tools are doing. So I'll make this PDF available as well. So all of your Smart Player tools, yes, all the tools are listed. So at the end of this webinar, I'll have the access control SmartPSS PowerPoint made available and this toolbox introduction. Okay, now that is all I have from the toolbox portion. I'll pass it on over to Steve.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Let's see here. Okay, let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, it's up.
Okay, great. So today we'll be talking about some of the recently added security features to our NVR. So these were kind of, snuck into the products without too much fanfare, but, we certainly feel that these, provide, definitely a benefit, particularly to the security of your NVR. So the newest Dahua NVRs will feature a variety of separate security modules that are designed to secure the operation of the recorder against unauthorized use. And this is provided by this kind of like firewall-like protection from network queries and attacks. And it provides a available secure connection from the Dahua camera to the NVR to the remote user. Now, this is not going to be installed just on the latest ones you might purchase from us, but as new firmware comes out with some of the older NVRs, you'll probably find that these security features have been added as well. So the first line of cybersecurity defense is to have an effective password. And it might surprise you that there are hundreds and perhaps thousands of IP cameras out there that operate without one. I was kind of shocked myself, but there's a website called Insecam, and they build themselves as a directory of online surveillance cameras that actually have no password whatsoever. So you can go in there and you can search cameras by countries, like what you see on that right-hand column there. So you can see in the US there's about 4,000 cameras available to watch. In Korea, the number 2 is about 1,700. Japan is next, that kind of thing. So from here, you can actually, search by that, by city, by type, and also by manufacturer. And just note that there are no Dahua cameras on there. So one thing about this site is I checked it a few years ago, and they actually used to host cameras with the default factory username and password, but those have been taken down. And I think that this is all because of, perhaps some, trespassing laws or whatever. Certainly if you've got a camera online and there's no password, you're in effect kind of broadcasting it. So that's probably one of the reasons that Insecam can do this. So, but, I mention all these things here because, in the past, some manufacturers didn't take, security, too seriously, and you could operate it without a password, and you could operate it for long periods of time using the factory default username and password. But the thing is that, most reputable, well-known security manufacturers will force a password change before you can actually use it. And that was a really important step for, the video security industry as a whole, but also any manufacturer that makes any other sort of IoT device, because if you leave your default username and password, then your system can easily become part of a zombie, bot force that, hackers could use to, perhaps take down other websites, and that's kind of the idea behind a DOS attack, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. So you're certainly not going to have this kind of problem with any of our cameras or NVRs because, we instituted the, forcing a password change. So you can't operate it really with the default information. So to really appreciate some of the features that we're going to talk about next, we'll just do a quick little internet primer. So, an IP address, of course, represents software or device that allows access on a network, but via a port number. And, most systems, whether they be computers or, anything that, uses an operating system and is designed to operate on a network or communicate with other devices will use ports. And there's approximately 65,000 ports that are available for communication between those types of devices. And they're usually broken down by either a UDP or TCP protocol. And these systems may not necessarily have all 65,000 ports available, but it's possible to bake that in there. All those ports aren't necessarily open, but just to remember that the more ports that you have open, the more vulnerable your system is to, attackers. Now, the table that you see in the lower right is just a simple table that shows some common port numbers for the services that you might see operational in a PC server, web server, home computer, maybe even your NVR. So you can see here that ports 20 and 21 are typically used for FTP communications. So if you've got a remote website and you want to add new content to it, well, you're going to probably upload new content using the FTP protocol. If that piece of hardware is going to operate as an email server, then you're going to probably want to have port 25 and port 110 to facilitate that for SMTP and POP3. So this is just kind of a sampling of all some popular ports that are in use in different devices. So why would an attacker want to know what ports are open? Well, if they want to be able to breach your system, and it's not just, a single device, they might want to be able to get on your entire network and then, poke around at, any of the computers that are on there or other devices. But in order to do that, they need to run some sort of exploit, like, inject a virus or some other control. And in order to do that, the attacker needs to find a vulnerability. And to find that, the attacker needs to fingerprint all the services that the target system was run, like protocols in use, which programs might actually use them. And to fingerprint the service, the attacker needs to identify if one is running on a publicly accessible or open port. So to find out which one of these ports runs services, the attacker needs to run a port scan. So because of all this, the port scan is one of the first recon steps that the attacker performs, before attempting to attack a system. And the tools to do that are pretty readily available. MassScan is reportedly one of the fastest TCP port scanners, and I'm not sure if I completely believe this claim according to this website, but it said it could scan the entire internet in about 6 minutes, transmitting up to 10 million packets per second. And, it's certainly not going to be able to, scan all devices on all ports, but if you cherry pick, which ports that you're, interested in attacking, then, you can certainly shorten the time to be able to do that. So what the most common thing is that a hacker would keep aware of, particular services or exploits which are commonly unpatched within a system. So this also serves to remind you that to make sure that, whatever device you have that operates on a network, make sure you upgrade to the latest firmware, because the latest firmware is going to address known vulnerabilities. So you don't want to have, a device that's running that hasn't been updated for a couple of years, because, you really put yourself at risk. So the two different types of common attacks that you would find are opportunistic and targeted. So opportunistic means that you've got a bad guy somewhere that are just scanning for open networks, services or ports, and they might actually target a geographical area, like say maybe Southern California or parts of England or something like that. They might also try to query using default or common weak passwords. They're also looking for unpatched services, and they might even use phishing emails. So the features that we're going to talk about today are going to be very effective against these opportunistic type of attacks, because these guys are looking for the low-hanging fruit. If you've got a house in a community and you've got the strongest locks and security in your place, well, the bad guys will probably go someplace else. Now, a target attack is a little bit more difficult to protect against, and they use a variety of different methods. So they might use pretty sophisticated social engineering So they might, know that a certain person works at a company or is a certain address, and they might want to impersonate or try to gain the trust of that person that's in a position to divulge important information. They might also use other advanced networking technologies. They could perform brute force password denial of service, DOS attack, network packet switching, and that kind of thing. Packet sniffing, that is. So, the gravity of the situation is pretty bad. Now, there's a number of very large and popular antivirus and anti-malware services out there. Checkpoint's a pretty big one, and they have a cyber threat map that runs on their website, and a lot of these companies have this kind of thing, but I made a short video clip here and you can see what's going on. So this shows you, this is sped up about 2 times, but where attacks are generated from which country and also to which destination. So the types of attacks are listed on the left-hand side. So content protection, there's Trojans, there's a DOS attack I just saw pop up there. And then in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that the top 3 targeted countries are Nepal, Bolivia, and Georgia. What's interesting is the top targeted industries appear to be education, then government, then communications. So once again, this is kind of a stark reminder as to, why you should do your due diligence and, up the security of your network. Now, one good way to help your situation is to evaluate how secure your network is. And there's a variety of free services that can provide a port scan of your system. So I've used this site for quite a while. This is from an organization called Gibson Research Corporation. And at grc.com, they have this free utility called Shields Up. And it's just it's a web resource. And what you do is from your computer, you just hit scan, and then this website will act as a port scanner and actively take a look at, the ports on your system and see what's open or what's not. So I did a port scan yesterday on my home office here, and it says that the truth stealth analysis that I failed, that, one of the ports is open that, perhaps I shouldn't have open. So this alerted me to the fact that I had the FTP port 21 open. And as I recall, I was doing some tests a while back where I was experimenting with FTP and I never closed it. So here's an area where I might want to close that port up so it no longer responds to any sort of queries. So that leads us into the specific features that are within the NVR. So in this security status page, this helps obtain an overview of overall device security, and that allows the users to better understand the current security condition. So you can also scan user, service, and security modules individually and get detailed information about them, as well as recommendations as to what to alter. So green icons that you see here, these represent the healthy status of the item. And then if it's not, then they'll turn orange, which means a risky status. So if a risk is detected, then the orange icon allows you to click on the details area to see what specifically is at risk. And then after you've made any configuration changes, you can manually rescan the module for updated status. So if all icons are in green color, that gives you the assurance that your NVR is optimally secured against unauthorized use. Now, the system service page allows control over common services and protocols. So here, in this area, the mobile push notifications, that allows alarms to be transmitted to the DMSS Smart app or the DSS, which is our VMS platform. Now, CGI and ONVIF are protocols that allow remote devices such as IP cameras to be easily added. And the NTP server allows the NVR to sync its time to an internet-based time server. So this way you don't never have to bother, updating the time. It'll be accurate because you're, synchronizing to this internet source. Well, SSH allows for encrypted connection to most network services, and that provides better security. And then device discovery, that allows the NVR to be detectable on the network, which is really handy when using the Dahua config tool. So by default, enable device discovery is on. So that means when you first set up the NVR, you put it on the network, you can more easily set it up by using the Dahua config tool, which Damon gave you a little introduction on. So that's one of the nice things about our ecosystem is that we provide all these things, and I'm sure a lot of you in the audience have already used it in the past. But this is really handy once during the initial setup when you might want to change the IP address, the username and password, change it from fixed to DHCP or vice versa. So in order for that to operate, then this particular box needs to be checked. The last one here, private protocol, this uses digest authentication to securely connect to the NVR. Now, if you're using like a third-party client software, if they don't support this, you can turn it off. But certainly if you're going to be using it with, our DSS VMS, then you can keep this enabled. So overall, this page allows for more granular control over these services or protocols. So for increased security, disable the ones that you don't need. So as a good example here, if you're using our Dahua NVR and only Dahua cameras, then, and you don't plan to add any third-party ones, you can disable ONVIF, for example. So that's just one less, service that's available to, query from the outside world. Now, a MAC or a physical address, it's a unique ID for your network device. And specifically, it's a hardware ID number that uniquely identifies each of the devices on a network. And that's provided by this 12-digit hexadecimal number, and it actually provides 281 trillion combinations. And the point of having this MAC address in here, it allows for considerably more efficient communications. So for example, like a network switch, you've got all these different devices that are hooked up to it. You got a couple of computers. You might have network address storage or NAS, or maybe a network hard drive, that sort of thing. The network switch keeps track of all the devices that are connected to it. It makes note of the IP address and also the MAC address. And this is stored internally in the switch as a MAC address table. So what happens is that once the MAC address table has been established, then when you go to your PC and you say, oh, I want to get this file from my NAS, then the network switch makes a connection between the NAS and your computer, and it doesn't flood the other ports with a bunch of unnecessary information. So it makes, reduces the bandwidth, it makes communications a lot faster. So the MAC address is actually manufactured into every network card, like, say the separate Ethernet card that may be in your computer. Most computers, it's built right onto the motherboard. Usually, they really can't be changed. Just note, however, that some devices, like routers, you can actually change the MAC address. Now, this is important because this means that within the attack defense page, you can make better use of it. And this includes important firewall configuration options. Now, the allow and block list modes enable you to control what external devices can or cannot connect to the NVR by either IP address or port number. So what you can do is here, the remote device's IP or MAC address, as well as the port number, can be specified and added here. So if you use this feature, it can greatly decrease the chance of intrusion by disallowing connection of any device other than those that are specifically allowed. So one thing I will note is I took a look at this allow list and block list, and this is not going to be as flexible as a full-blown separate firewall. So with the block list, you can't do a range of IP addresses with just one single entry. You have to specify each one individually. So if you did want to say block out an entire country from being able to access your device, you'd have to use a third-party firewall device. But the block list would be handy, say, if you had a small business and you had a manager that used to work for you that either quit or got fired, and where they were communicating from, you could block them from even accessing the system at all, even though you've changed the username and password. So as part of the attack defense page, this account lockout area allows you to specify how many login attempts are allowed before that user is locked out. You can also set the lock time in minutes here. Now, you have a different section here that's called anti-DOS attack. So a DOS, or denial of service attack, is not an uncommon form of an attack against a website or possibly even an NVR. So usually to do that, the attacker might flood the IP address of the NVR website with a bunch of SYN messages or ICMP packets. And that could render the host unable to respond to legitimate connections. So if you think that you might go under this type of attack, or you've experienced it before, then enabling these services will help mitigate these attacks for increased uptime and responsiveness. So SSL and TLS certification is a means to verify the source of web pages, domains, IP cameras, and even NVRs. And this system helps secure information exchange and is used in all electronic financial transactions. So as you've probably noted in your web browsing experience, if you go to your online banking site, that they're going to have a certificate from a trusted authority that is going to tell you that you're actually contacting the person that you want to. So when you contact bankofamerica.com or wellsfargo.com, they're going to have a certificate that proves that they are who they say they are. Now, most Dahua NVR support use of CA, or certificate authority certificates, which once again verifies to the client that you're connected to the host claim. Now, you can apply for a certificate directly from this page from a CA authority right here. And then once granted, you can upload the certificate or even one from a third-party source, a trusted one. There's also the ability to create a self-signed certificate. And this is handy if you don't want to go through the trouble or expense of getting a third party to create this for you. Just know that the certificate is really only going to be germane to the person who created it. So this is perfectly fine for maybe a small business or residential application, that kind of thing. If you've got a much larger corporation where you've got a lot of people accessing this, then you probably want to get a CA certificate. Now, AV encryption allows encryption to the NVR so that it accepts encrypted audio and video streams from a compatible Dahua IP camera. And this was actually rolled in kind of recently, also with little fanfare on some of our newest cameras. And if you attended the recent multiplex 4-sensor camera, that also has AV encryption. So just note that if you want to use this feature, that the encryption type must match the camera setting. So you have to make sure you've got a camera that supports it, the NVR supports it, and they're using the same encryption type. So the default is AES 256-bit. Now this area here, RTSP, which is the real-time streaming protocol, is used to deliver AV streams to most devices. So if you enable RTSP over TLS, that allows encrypting the stream before transmission. Now, this area down here allows you to specify the device certificate so that it facilitates that encryption. Now, all of these features allow secure encryption of the AV stream between camera and NVR, so to prevent viewing even if it's intercepted or recorded. So now we've taken a look, we've gotten an overview of all these different security modules and features, and we've got some recommendations and best practices. So AV encryption is probably unnecessary if your IP cameras are home run directly to the NVR PoE ports. Assuming they're in the same building and it's secure, you know, the people that are going in there. If they're home run to the NVR, then that connection is not really going over to the internet. So it's probably, you know, it's not going to be worth enabling that because your system, that connection is already pretty secure. Just note that with any type of encryption, data encryption, there's always some sort of overhead. So there's going to be extra bits that are thrown in there along with the actual data, and that might produce anywhere from you know, 20% overhead to even higher. So you have to take that into consideration if you've got a much larger system, and you know, you're going to be encrypting a lot of cameras, maybe hundreds of cameras going into a network that might have a centralized recording situation. So just take that into consideration. However, you know, you might consider AV encryption if your cameras are in a different building or if they're connected in a different city, anytime they're going to be connected via the WAN or internet. So that means that, you know, that connection is potentially exposed. And you might also consider using it with Wi-Fi cameras. Now, I don't know, I didn't have time to check to see if our Wi-Fi cameras offer this, but even if it's not available, then, you know, certainly use the strongest Wi-Fi security format that we have, which is probably going to be some variant of WPA2, and also use a long password. Just remember that a Wi-Fi camera is, you know, broadcasting the information in, you know, in the air within a short geographical area. Now, if you access your NVR via only known hardware, we recommend you use the firewall, allow list, and add MAC address. And this would allow you to specify all the MAC addresses of all the devices that'll be accessing that NVR. So like, say, maybe your mobile phone, or maybe the home router or something like that. If you're, you know, if you've got several PCs behind the home router is probably going to have a MAC address, and then you could add that to the allow list. Now, slightly, a little more less practical would be if you access your NVR via only specific IP addresses that don't change. If that's the case, then use firewall, allow list, add IP address. Just note, though, that in a common scenario, you've got a manager that's working from home. Well, his home internet plan probably doesn't include a fixed IP address. It's probably going to be dynamic, which means it'll change after time. So if you use this method, then they'll probably get locked out at some time. So I therefore think it's probably a little bit better and more practical to use MAC address allow lists for that reason. But, you know, you might have a situation where you've got a medium-sized company and, you know, you've got a manager in a different building, and that building's ISP uses a fixed IP address, in which case the second scenario is, you know, very usable. So the value proposition from all this is that collectively it increases security and oversight. So all these advanced security features help protect your system, 24/7. So you've got those firewall-like features. You've got the allow and block lists, certificate support, and then also AV stream encryption. And you also are able to remotely monitor your assets via smartphone app, PC software, which could be DSS Express or Pro, or the web interface on the device. So that means that you can securely view your system anytime from anywhere. So that ends the presentation portion, and we'll go over to Q&A. So if you haven't already started or added your question here, now's a good time to do it. So just type it in, and then both Damon and I will